The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Ski Sundown in nearby New Hartford, Connecticut, offering group, private, or semi-private lessons for all ages and ability levels. Options and details available at skisundown.com. Winter made better. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Window World of Western Mass, a local family business with experienced craftsmen offering skylights, siding, gutters, and doors. WindowWorldofWesternMA.com.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, we mark the 5th anniversary of the world shutting down with virologist Mandy Muller at UMass Amherst and a look back at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
But first, elsewhere on campus and regarding endemics of a different sort, we're looking at screens of a global scale.
If you're a fan of films and you like The Brutalist, we're in a Brutalist building right now.
Talking about film.
Herder Hall, right along the Haggis Mall at UMass campus, because UMass Amherst, in their interdepartmental program in film studies, is presenting the Massachusetts Multicultural Film Festival. We welcome back to the show Jim Hicks, who we had on a couple weeks ago at the kickoff of this Multicultural Film Festival with a couple of the filmmakers behind one of the early films. You also correctly predicted, I believe, the movie that would win for Best Documentary Oscar, correct?
I can't take complete credit because I didn't really want to, since we had another nominee on our list, right? But yeah, No Other Land pulled it off, and I was pleasantly surprised.
And they had a really powerful speech, acceptance speech at the Oscars.
No Other Land reflect the harsh reality that we have been enduring for decades and still persist as we call on the world to take serious actions to stop the injustice and to stop the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people.
We made this film, Palestinians and Israelis, because together our voices are stronger. We see each other. The atrocious destruction of Gaza and its people, which must end. The Israeli hostages brutally taken in the crime of October 7th, which must be freed. When I look at Bassel, I see my brother, but we are unequal.
And that film was part of the Multicultural Film Festival last week.
That auditorium was actually even bigger than Amherst Cinema, so for No Other Lands, we packed the house at over 220 people watching the film. We had a fantastic discussion afterwards, and that's another feature of the festival. We've got fantastic people presenting the film and running the Q&A afterwards. So it's it's an educational experience on campus.
I love it. And to get 200 people to come out to a film in this day and age is a huge achievement if you ask anybody that works anything to do with film.
Yep. No, it was pouring that night too, so.
Yeah, nice. Perfect night to watch a film.
But it's also really cool because there aren't many other places to see that film currently. Yeah. So this was a unique opportunity for folks to come out in the rain and see something that it had just won the Oscar, that week, too.
Yeah. The standard joke now is that it has more Oscars than it has distributors.
Right, because it is not available to watch in the United States via the normal means of watching these types of films, which is what's great about something like the Mass Multicultural Film Festival. Jim, you brought some folks here to help talk about some of the other films coming up. Who do we have here with us?
So Adriana Piteta is going to present My Imaginary Country, a fantastic documentary by the legendary filmmaker Patricio Guzman from Chile. And I've also brought my assistant curator, who does actually most of the real work, Thelia Sanz, and so she's here for giving some backup as well.
So Adriana, tell us about the film that you'll be presenting.
So this film is a fantastic film, as many of his other films. Patricio Guzman is kind of a biographer of Chile. He has built the political, historical, social narrative of Chile through his documentaries in many different ways. And My Imaginary Country captures all the social struggles of the last, one of the biggest and last revolutionary moments in Latin American history, which started with some protests in Chile around 2019 to change the constitution that was basically written by the last dictatorship in Chile, the Pinochet constitution, well known as the Pinochet constitution. The whole process, he captures like the whole process of like social discontent around that, and also all the process to get to voting a new constitution, but in a way that actually in many ways resembles what he did with The Battle of Chile, which is a documentary from the 70s that captures the process before the coup d'etat in Chile, getting on what was happening on the streets with people and protests. And now he's doing that in 2019, and it's heartbreaking for many reasons because after the dictatorship, when he came back from exile, he was exiled for many years, he saw this movement and he never expected to see that. He would say every time I would come back to Chile, I was seeing like a new mall, and I was seeing like Chile turning into a mall. And now I'm seeing all these young people protesting, and he does a great job capturing that this is a female movement mostly. Like all the women that appear in this documentary, all of them are women, young women, most of them, who in many ways led this movement. And, well, I don't want to spoil, but I mean, he does a great job understanding and reading what are the new demands, and also understanding for someone of his generation that had his whole political views formed in the 60s and 70s, and a unique capacity of understanding this new revolution, as he called it, the second revolution, and understanding what are the things at stake in this new revolution.
I'll spoil it, even though Adriana didn't want to, because part of the reason we picked this movie is the film series is about documenting dissent, and we definitely wanted people to come out and see that, sometimes we win.
Aha, spoiler.
Well, I mean, like, if you've listened to any of Ana Tijoux' catalog, I think you know that they won.
Speaking of females involved in the movement.
Just saying. I'm curious about the overall arc of his filmmaking style and how that changes from the way that he documented the coup d'etat to this film here, and what comes in between in Exile. Do you feel like there are characteristics to his filmmaking that are really important as a part of this series?
Yes, definitely. I think like the Battle of Chile, this documentary I was referencing from the 70s, is basically, it's been called like a live history or an archaeology of the present. It was like basically all this rawness of like filming what was happening at the time. And then post-exile, there is like this series of films that have been described as more poetic or more metaphorical. He does a lot of work with landscape, with actual archaeologists and astronomers. There is a film called Nostalgia for the Light, in which he goes to the desert in Chile to work with astronomers and archaeologists around why the Atacama Desert is such a special place for that. But at the same time, he interviews a lot of women that are looking for disappeared people there.
That is an incredible film.
It's an
incredible
film.
place for astronomy in general.
Yes, absolutely. And that is part of a trilogy. There is also the Cordillera of My Dreams. So these films are kind of reflections about memory in ways that touch a lot that the landscape of Chile. He builds like a map of Chile in a way through memory. So I think that we see a bit of that poetic engagement, and also in a way more personal, more like autobiographical, or more like his reflections about what is happening in my imaginary country, because there are many moments in which he captures different symbols around what's happening, like different new symbols in terms of the protests and how people are bringing up new poetic ways of approaching social protest that he did not see necessarily in the 70s and 80s. And he does a lot of the representation of those symbols in this film. So I think it's definitely a post-poetic trilogy film that combines a bit of the style of the Battle of Chile, but definitely his post-exile experience with the country.
And we're talking about the film My Imaginary Country, which is part of the Massachusetts Multicultural Film Festival. It'll be shown on UMass campus at the Eisenberg School of Management Wednesday, March 26th. Adriana, you are a teacher at Mount Holyoke,
I teach at Mount Holyoke. I'm in the Spanish, Latin, and Latin American Studies department.
but are you from Chile?
I'm not. I'm from Uruguay.
Okay.
I'm a neighbor. My research focus is on the area, on
Yeah.
Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil, in dictatorship, post-dictatorship contexts. And also, I mean, beyond the research, I'm a fan of his work.
Yeah. Celia, you are the co-curator of this. There's another film coming up this week, right? Tell us about some of the other films in this Documenting Dissent Multicultural Film Festival that you want to highlight.
This week on Wednesday, we have Anima, My Father's Dresses, by director Uli Decker, which is a German film in which the director kind of tries to make sense about the story of her father, because after her father died, she found out that her father was cross-dressing. That really changed absolutely her experience of living with her dad, thinking that he was also always kind of like a person with a lot of mood changes and kind of like very private. So the movie what tries to do is make sense of the history of her dad, her personal story, and it's a lot of intertwined between different genres. It uses animation, it uses archival footage, it uses recreations of these images, and it's just a beautiful film. That's going to happen this Wednesday.
This Wednesday, the 12th,
Yes.
at UMass Eisenberg School.
Yes, yes.
I want to see that one because I literally just moved all my dresses on top of my garage. So if my children, they already know I have these dresses, so they know where to find them.
Style-wise, I saw a lot of similarities between that and the Omar Sosa movie.
Oh, yeah.
Just stylistically, like, because of the many different ways that they were telling the singular story, and also stories of repression are always kind of interesting.
But so where does the dissent come into this one? Because, I mean, it's hard to dissent when you haven't comfortably reconciled with who your whole humanity is, I guess.
Yes, I think that when we were thinking about dissent, it was in a very broad sense of the word, because we have from stories, as what Adriana was saying, about like a country's uprising, to more intimate stories of what kinds of dissent happen in your everyday life, in which you have to reconcile what are the expectations of society about the way you have to dress, the way you have to look, or who you can love, and also the everyday acts of defiance of those expectations. And I think in this movie, they really try to reconcile those everyday fights that many people have to overcome. And also the own director talking about her own queer identity, and how that kind of like makes her understand herself more, her father more.
And the film is Anima, My Father's Dresses. It's this Wednesday, the 12th, 6:30, UMass Eisenberg School of Management as part of Documenting Dissent, the 32nd annual Massachusetts Multicultural Film Festival. Film festival will go all the way through very near the end of April.
Soon we'll take a look back at the start of the pandemic as we hit the 5-year marker for the start of lockdown with virologist from UMass, Mandy Muller.
This is dissidence, though.
Dissident, dissent, it's the same thing.
But first, we'll hear about another movie coming to the Massachusetts Multicultural Film Festival and dive into the versatility of documentary as a medium with Jim Hicks, Celia Sainz, and Adriana Piteta.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
So many T's.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by UMass Amherst School of Public Policy. Admissions now open for graduate programs in 2025. Learn how to become a changemaker at umass.edu/SPP.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. We continue our conversation about the Mass Multicultural Film Festival with organizers Jim Hicks and Celia Sainz and Professor Adriana Piteta.
Other films you want to highlight that are coming up? Jim Hicks.
The week after My Imaginary Country, we're showing a film by the incredible director Agnieszka Holland. So in 3 weeks, we'll be showing you films from 3 countries, Germany, Chile, and then Poland. And Agnieszka Holland, most film buffs will probably know her from her Holocaust movies, Angry Harvest and Europa. But people in this country are also going to know her as one of the directors of the best television show ever made, The Wire, right?
I thought you were going to say Twin Peaks.
No, you've said that enough times over the last few years.
I'm grieving!
You say that as if it's going to make him stop.
You remind me today of a small Mexican chihuahua.
But Green Borders tells it's an excruciating film to watch, but it's also perhaps the most beautiful single film in this series. It's just incredibly beautifully filmed. And it's also the only one in our series that isn't technically a documentary. It's a feature film. It's a feature film built with documentary techniques. She did lots of interviews. She found lots of interview footage. She talked to border guards, refugees, and activists, and it's really those three groups whose stories she tells, and the way that they come together and basically fight it out at the border of Belarus and Poland. And this was this incredible moment in world history where Belarus was flying in refugees from Afghanistan, from Syria, from other places, and using them, weaponizing them, literally. It's a term that's getting used way too much these days, but this is literally, there's a moment where a Polish border guard talks about these people as being live bullets, right? And the ethical obscenity of that should be clear to everybody, using people as a means. But that's what happens. These people are put in Belarus, forced across the border into Poland where they want to go, and then the Polish guards find them and push them back. And it just keeps happening over and over again. And the torture that a family that they're following suffers because of this. This one I'm not going to spoil for you because I probably couldn't even relate it without breaking up.
And this one is called Green Border, and it'll be Wednesday, April 2nd, as part of this Documenting Dissent Film Festival, once again at the Eisenberg School of Management here on UMass campus.
Yeah, and the other thing that Holland does is follows an activist group that's trying to help at that border in the same way that we saw in our first film of the series, Borderland. We have activists here trying to give humanitarian aid and keep people from dying at our borders. So there's a lot of overlap in the series that we're showing this because what's happening in the world isn't the same in different places, but there's definitely a lot of places in which similar things are happening.
Documenting dissent is the overarching theme for the film festival, but there seems to be a lot of conversation about borders, how borders work, and how people interact with borders, not just in the titles of two of the films, but in the content also. Can we talk about that as a through line through the three movies coming, and perhaps the three that we've already seen?
I think that's definitely true. I mean, to some extent, even in thinking about the three films that we're talking about today, one of the things that connects them is they're about the boxes, the cages, and in that sense, also the borders that societies and states put people into, and the impossibility to live within that, right? I mean, with Anima, I was listening as you were talking about it, and I think Thalia is completely right. There's a kind of dissent and rebellion at the private level. I think Uli Decker talks about her film as she wanted to make a film that was personal but not private. And she wanted to make a film at some level that was universal too. It's breaking through and refusing to accept the definitions and the structures that society tries to corral us with. Yeah.
And I think also a very interesting way of thinking about borders is not only about physical borders, but the borders between, for example, these dichotomies of gender between masculine or feminine, or between like a feature film or a documentary. And I think what's very interesting is like these movies, they have many overlapping themes, but also they are so different from each other. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, they try to explore the limits of what is a documentary, what is a feature film, and we have Green Border using documentary techniques, even though it's a feature film. And then we have, for example, Anima that uses her own life, but also, actually, she wanted to make a feature film. But because of budget restrictions, she ended up doing more of a documentary. So I think it's very interesting to see how these movies are like playing with those limits of what is a documentary, what is a feature film, and also, of course, Patricio Guzman with his poetic filmmaking that is always so beautiful.
I can add something about this between the individual and the collective that is appears also in this film, in My Imaginary Country, that is many stories of people who lost vision during these protests because they were shot in the eyes, and and it was one of the main horrendous outcomes of these protests, and the way in which these stories are registered there. It's very interesting how they are these individual private stories of these people and how they are living with this, but also the collective struggle and the context in which this new situation of their lives they have to deal with was triggered, and the way in which the film depicts that. I think it's also a very interesting way of dealing with that border of the individual and the collective and the private and the public, and who takes responsibility for this crime.
Boring, generic question, but I'm always interested in the answer. What makes film such a good vehicle for conversations of this nature?
It's not a boring question, and it's one of the ones that I think about a lot. I think documentary today isn't just documenting, it's intervening, right? And so one of the things that you can do with a camera is give people a representation, but you can also, in some sense, we saw it in No Other Land, right? I mean, it's the only film I remember seeing where I'm watching a scene and thinking, oh my God, they're going to kill the director, and we're going to watch it. So it's clearly intervening into an ongoing situation, and I think that's what happens in a lot of these films. But it's also kind of flipping that. Agnieszka Holland makes a feature film. If she tried to make a documentary, the state would have shut it down, right? The activists that she was working with would have all gone to jail, right? So in some sense, by synthesizing the stories that she was telling or hearing, she manages to tell a story that puts us inside what's happening in history in real time, but hopefully at some level helping people to understand that they can change what's happening.
The next film for the Massachusetts Multicultural Film Festival, Anima, My Father's Dresses, shows for free on UMass campus on March 12th at 6:30. Find more information on it and the other films of the festival on UMass's website.
And full disclosure, UMass holds the license for WFCR, but it doesn't impact our coverage of events happening at UMass.
They're just one of the many cities in Western Mass.
Yeah, that does really cool things that, we're going to talk all about ourselves, and we hold our own license during the fund drive tomorrow.
Thanks.
Now we'll just walk past the Fine Arts Center at the campus of UMass and the pond to one of the many moral science buildings to talk about viruses and the way one novel coronavirus affected the whole globe 5 years ago with Dr. Mandy Muller.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Ski Sundown in nearby New Hartford, Connecticut, offering bundled lesson packages including rental equipment and lift tickets. Online registration available at skisundown.com. Winter made better.
"5 years ago, today, the world declared pandemic.
And then we had a weekend to sort of celebrate, and after that, we all went home forever.
Everything shut down. Friday the 13th, 2020, the last normal-ish day. Everything after that changed. I, at the time, was a morning show host on 93.9 The River. Myself and all of our listeners were washing our groceries and doing all sorts of things that turned out...
You should probably still keep doing.
Washing your groceries? I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, like your fruits and whatever.
Yeah, well, yeah, but you didn't need to wipe down your milk cartons necessarily, like we were doing, in an effort to separate fact from fiction when it came to the world of viruses. I reached out to the flagship campus of the University of Massachusetts, right in our backyard, UMass Amherst, looked up a random name in the UMass virology department, and lo and behold, there was one Dr. Mandy Muller in a time when it made a lot of sense to call the regular weekly segment the Muller Report. We are at the UMass campus office of Dr. Mandy Muller this 5-year anniversary of the pandemic. Thank you for having us here, Dr. Mandy Muller.
Thank you. Still standing.
Yes. Well, luckily, we all made it. And I mean, we are, kind of joking about it. Millions of Americans died because of this virus. I still think we as a nation and a world have not properly grieved what we all experienced 5 years ago. It's definitely a sense of gallows humor with trying to keep smiling while the world is burning in so many ways, not just in virological ways.
But maybe that was seeing the fuse on the dynamite being lit and going, ha 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 ha.
What do you remember about those early days as a virologist trying to learn about SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19? All this information I learned from you.
Yes, absolutely. The first days were crazy because we didn't know anything. And so all we had to base our advice on were the past SARS epidemic, the SARS-1 one. But turns out that one was very different. So we had
What was SARS-1 for those who don't remember?
So it's basically a little cousin of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. And there was a short-lived pandemic caused by the SARS-1 virus in 2003, 2004.
A pandemic or an epidemic?
A little bit in between. So it was definitely clusters of cases, mostly in China. And, that virus was giving people very severe symptoms. And so people were hospitalized almost right away. For SARS-CoV-2, the virus causing COVID-19, that was different because most people didn't have a lot of symptoms, and so continued to go around and spreading this little virus. So we had to learn on the fly.
And I remember we were all, how long are you potentially virulent? Is it 15 days? There are 6 feet of separation. Can you go on a bike trail and ride past somebody on a bike who has COVID-19 but no symptoms, and are you going to catch it? These were all the questions that we were taking it from listeners and running by you who just knows viruses, not even this particular novel virus. It was, that is why it was novel, because nobody knew anything about it.
That's right. We didn't know. We were washing our milk carton. We were wearing masks that were made out of scarves. We looked like idiots for a long time. But we learned, and over the following couple years, we learned a lot about these viruses, and that's why now we are a lot more relaxed around these viruses, and that's why we're meeting in person right now, and we're not even masked, because we feel confident that we know enough about this virus that we can somewhat control it.
Tell us more about that, because, it was so scary, and I think hopefully we were doing the right thing to be masking at a particular time. What information do you have that's changed your mind to the point where you do feel comfortable as a virologist not wearing a mask with us right now?
Well, we learned a lot. So first of all, since then, we have really good antiviral against this virus. So if you are experiencing lots of bad symptoms, you can get treated. Or even if you have mild symptoms, you're always open to get Paxlovid, for example, which would help with symptoms. We have vaccines, obviously, that we were very lucky that these vaccines came out so quickly and worked so well. So now pretty much all of us have some kind of immunity against this virus, either because we're getting the vaccine or because we were exposed to it. And we also know, at least I'm hoping that the population knows that, if you have some kind of symptoms, it's better to stay home and to get tested. And so we're not throwing those viral particles all around us anymore.
We are looking back at the 5-year anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic with UMass virologist Dr. Mandy Muller in her office right on UMass campus.
Your primary focus in no way was COVID. It wasn't a thing that was necessarily on your radar. Your focus is the many forms of herpes. But what similarities does COVID have to the herpes virus?
Great question. So viruses, they basically are all very different. So typically the herpes viruses are a lot bigger than the coronaviruses. They don't even have the same type of genome, so very different in many, many ways. But they all have this common characteristics that they all want to take over the cell that they infect and the host that they infect. And so they are all very, very smart in doing this, and so they all have different strategies, but in the end, the goal is the same, is to be able to produce baby viruses, basically, so that one virus entering a cell would produce 1,000 more after the infection cycle. So in that, they're very similar, that the goal of making baby viruses.
Is it true that viruses exist in this liminal state between a living thing and a not living thing? If you have a bacterial infection, bacteria is alive and can be killed, but viruses are weird like that, right?
Yeah, they're definitely in the middle ground there. So they need a host cell to replicate, and so to amplify themselves and go and infect new cells and new hosts. So that's definitely true. They need us for this. But when they're outside of a host, it's not like they're gonna get destroyed for most of them. So the way I like to think about them is like seeds. And so, if you have a seed in your drawer, it's not going to grow into a plant. But if you put it into soil, then that's when it becomes a flower, a beautiful flower, or a terrible pest. And so that's the same thing for viruses. Outside of the host, they're not doing much, but they're not really dead either. So they're in between world.
I think it's
They're
so.
like the Borg.
They really are.
I am Locutus, a Borg.
There are legitimate scientists who theorize, and again, this is all theory and conspiracy, that they are alien, that they came from an out of terrestrial object on a meteorite or something and have populated the entire planet in a form of life that does not exactly reflect the type of life that we refer to as life on this planet. I love that theory. What do you think about that?
Are they the same people who think that mushrooms are in that category?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But they could be, who knows?
I mean, they're definitely constrained by the same rules as we are. So their genome is based on nucleic acid. You know, this is really what they need to survive. And we started that way. Our cells started that way. So we might be coming from the same meteorites, I guess.
Well, people think water might have come from a meteorite. So yeah, any sort of life could have come from out of this planet. We don't know where it came from, and it's really awesome. We're talking about viruses, though, on this pandemic anniversary. Coronaviruses are called such because they're shaped like a crown. The novel coronavirus is what caused COVID-19. SARS-CoV-2 is the virus's name. What made this novel coronavirus so novel in the shape of coronaviruses, crown-shaped viruses?
Yeah, so coronaviruses are viruses that circulate on our planet fairly widely. So we have mild forms and we have bad forms, but they also circulate very widely in animals. And often in animals, they don't actually really cause symptoms, and so we're not necessarily aware that these animals are, infected with these viruses. And that's perfectly fine, and we're perfectly fine. But the problem is if one of those viruses jump from an animal to a human, and in that case, that can be really bad for the person who's infected. But most of the time when that happens, the virus doesn't know how to go from person to person. And so what happens with this novel coronavirus is that this virus made the jump, ended up in a human somewhere, and from that primary human infection, the virus learned to go from human to human. And so that's how it started this worldwide pandemic. It's really just evolution putting bottlenecks on this virus evolution, and the virus going around those bottlenecks by jumping from people to people.
When the pandemic first came through and we were wondering where this virus came from, there was all sorts of talk about a wet market and animals and jumping from human species. There was a coronavirus lab in Wuhan, China. There is all sorts of theories and philosophies of where this virus came from. Now, where do you land on that, Dr. Mandy Muller?
So there was a lot of investigation around this. Certainly knowing where a pandemic starts from, this is very important because that way we can learn about it and we can react better next time. And so there was a lot of investigation to figure out where this virus is coming from. This came hand in hand with a lot of political aspect. Looking for a culprit for this pandemic, which always happens, but that's just the way it is. So scientists went on site. There was a lot of experiment done, lots of investigations and sequencing and going through the notebooks of that lab and going through the wet markets to see what happened. And so right now, the scientific conclusion is that yes, this virus probably jumped from what is called a wet market, which is just a very crowded place where live animals are in contact with lots of humans. So a very perfect ground for these viruses to jump. And so this is where the scientific data is right now, is that this virus came out from this market. Now, obviously, you've heard of all the controversies around it. Lots of people are trying to push for other theories, but that's just what it is. Science is science, and you have to follow the facts, and the facts are that this virus is very likely came out from this wet market, and we know this because there was a lot of sequencing done.
Could it have come from the lab to the wet market to where we're at right now, or is that also not something scientists are thinking?
Well, there's really no indication that this happened. So there's really no sign that anyone in this lab was infected or had any kind of disease or symptoms, nothing reported. They didn't have this particular virus in their, tubes in their freezers or anything like this. And so there's really no indication that this happened. So right now, with just the data that we have, what we can say is that this virus came from this market, probably an animal that was infected, probably an animal that got in contact with an infected bat or something like this. And it's just random and unlucky, but that's what evolution is for you.
The first large-scale encounter with the first coronavirus, I think, was bird or swine flu. Is that correct? And what similarities do those have?
So the first epidemic with SARS was also a coronavirus, and bird flu is different because this is an influenza virus. So these are two very different viral families, but they similarly transmit through interactions with animals, and those viruses, in particular for bird flu, they circulate in birds, and so the worry is that at some point these viruses can similarly make a jump. This is really the image that we have of viruses jumping from an animal to a human, and so with bird flu, that's the worry, is that at some point it will get into the human population, as we're seeing right now with interaction with infected cattle. And so every time there's a new human infection, you provide this virus with an opportunity to learn how to go from human to humans. But these are two different stories just because these are two very different viruses.
Are you concerned about the current bird flu?
It would be hard not to be. So certainly these bird flu viruses are circulating. It turns out that they adapt very well to cattle, which I didn't know they could do. So what it means is that right now there's plenty of infection that we know of, or maybe we don't know of, which means that there are also a lot of people in contact with these viruses. Up until now, we've been lucky. There haven't been lots of very severe cases, although there's been a few. But my worry is always that viruses, if you give them a chance, they will outsmart us. And so right now, this virus is, again, it's stuck. An infection comes from an animal, goes into a human, and that's it. That's the end of it. But if the virus learns to go from human to human, that's when we're in trouble.
But the coronavirus isn't the one that Assistant Professor Mandy Muller from UMass Amherst is primarily studying.
No, that one is far more widespread and colorful, and we'll get to check it out close up in her lab next.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, offering Co-op Advantage checking with cash back on all purchases, plus secure debit card controls, all from the UMass 5 mobile banking app. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, homegrown in Hatfield, Massachusetts, and providing energy savings for their customers for over 10 years. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
We're speaking with Dr. Mandy Muller, UMass virologist, on the 5th anniversary of the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. You were my go-to virologist for listener questions in the early days of the pandemic.
And one of our first guests on this show, too, because it was towards the end where, everyone was finally, really going outside for real. It was cool to talk to you at the end of everybody's vigilance, however sad that sentence is.
The other thing is, the first time I ever met you in person was at a Soul Magnets show.
Soul Magnets is Khalees's band.
On Amherst Common, you were playing an outdoor show in the summer of 2021. We had spoken on the phone 50-something times from the beginning of the pandemic, with the first face-to-face encounter, Soul Magnet show, right down the street, downtown Amherst. That was fun.
Yeah, that was really fun.
And then the virus hit again in that fall, and things got really terrible again.
Maybe that was a little presumptive of us. We should maybe stay inside a little longer.
Science is about learning and making mistakes.
That's true.
It's about blowing up rockets over the Gulf of America. That's just how science happens.
It's the Gulf of Mexico.
Speaking of politics, Dr. Mandy Muller, some of your research is federally funded. It just so happens you're leaving us to go to Switzerland. Not, I am told, because of the current administration. This was already something in play previous to, but these federal cuts are having direct effect on what you're trying to do and what the rest of the virology department is trying to do here at UMass.
Yes, so a lot of changes are coming. Basically, right now, everyone is very worried that not only there's going to be funding cuts, but there's going to be people being fired, a lot fewer opportunities, and a lot more directed research, meaning that, if you have a specific type of research that you're doing and you're using all the wrong words for this research, then maybe you'll be a target and you'll lose your funding. So there's a lot of worry, a lot of chaos, and basically people not knowing what the funding landscape is going to look like in 6 months.
Your main bread and butter is the gift that keeps on giving. Herpes.
Everybody's got it.
Everybody's got it. That is one of the first thing I learned from you and when I had you on my show. Herpes got a bad rap, probably from bad 1980s movies.
What was that? Space herpes.
Everybody's got herpes.
Everybody got herpes, at least one, possibly more than one. So, you know, friend for life.
Friend for life!
What are some of our favorite herpes that most people have that aren't necessarily the sexually transmitted kind that get a bad rap?
Yeah, still this one, you most likely have it no matter what. So HSV 1 and 2 are the most common ones. EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, you know, that virus that causes the kissing disease, mono, this is also a herpes. Chickenpox is a herpes. So yeah, lots of different type of herpes. They all do something slightly different. They're all beautiful weirdos in the world of viruses, but I love them dearly. So.
Why do you love herpes so much?
I love herpes.
Why do you keep giving it to people?
How else are the experiments going to know? That's not how they're done.
It's not how it works. So yeah, no, I love herpes because they're really big ancient viruses. They've been with us for so long. So basically right now they learn to do everything that we do. That's why I think those viruses are so smart. You know, if you have 90% of the population that's infected with the virus, that's a very smart virus. You know, that's something that spreads really, really widely. We turn into little viral factories for these viruses and spread it around for them. So really smart viruses. I really enjoy working with those.
How many types of herpes are there?
Many. In humans, I don't know, at least, 8, 9, 10s probably. Even things that you don't necessarily associate with herpes, but like CMV that causes a lot of birth defects, that's also a herpes virus. So yeah, plenty of herpes viruses.
You have different color herpes here at the UMass Virology Lab, Dr. Mandy Muller?
Yes, we have fluorescent viruses. They can be green, they can be red, depending on what they do. And we just play around with, messing around on how they work and see how it helps them go from cells to cells or how it helps them dampen the immune response. So we're learning a lot from these viruses.
Can we see them?
Yeah.
Yes!
Also, while we're moving, so you have a microwave and a fridge in here that both say food only, and I feel like I know the answer, but I do still have to ask what goes in the ones that aren't food only.
Oh, I can show you.
Yeah!
Plenty of viruses.
My friend Mary, who's a new hire here at the UMass Virology Lab, is getting ready to steal Dr. Mandy Muller's microwave for her lab. There she is! Mary, why do you want to steal Dr. Mandy Muller's microwave?
We adopted a microwave from a lab that closed down, and that microwave is falling apart. So when her lab starts to shut down, we are taking the microwave.
Are you sure you don't want one from the NEPM offices? We literally have 2 extra.
And they're pretty good, but they're just regular old microwaves, kind of?
Yeah, we take a microwave.
All right, carry on. We're going to go look at different color herpes.
Oh, very excited.
It's going to be loud in there.
Yeah, okay, good. We love that. Hello. We've come to look at your herpes.
Hi, student Anna.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm gonna grab some gloves. And this is not to protect myself because I don't worry about my lab herpes, but this is to protect my herpes from me.
Opening what looks like a refrigerator of herpes.
It's actually warm, so it's body temperature. So this is where we grow our cells. So obviously you want them to grow in similar conditions that it would look like in your body. So this is actually warm. There's CO2 in there.
Just removing the petri dish. Put the petri dish under a microscope.
On a microscope, just as is. If you look at it, what you're seeing are cells that are actually infected with these viruses. So if you want to look into it.
Go ahead, Khalees. You get to look first.
Oh, cool! Oh, wow. That's so neat. They have so many different shapes.
Yeah, so the large ones are the light ones, and the ones floating around are most likely dead.
They look like the floaters that exist in my eyes when I look at a blue sky, like all the trash left over in my eyes. They look exactly like that, except this is all gray.
It's all gray for now.
For now, yeah. I can't tell the difference between my floaters and these things. So
Your floaters are darker.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a ton of them moving. Does that mean they're all dead, or?
No, they're actually attached to the plastic.
Ah.
Because in most of our tissues, cells are attached to one another. Except blood cells, cells tend to prefer to be attached to a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so now I'm gonna go to the settings where the cells are gonna turn green if they are actually infected with these viruses.
Woo, woo, woo.
So the green ones are infected?
Yes. Right.
Okay, you get to look first.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of herpes in there.
Oh, neat.
Now the whole thing is green. It looks like Jell-O. Everything is green. So is there differentiation between what's what?
No, it's just that, so the viruses, the herpes viruses, they're really good at staying quiet in cells, which means that they're not actually being kicked out of the cell. And so that means that all of these cells are infected, but in a dormant form. And so that's why they're all green. It's just they carry these viruses the same way that we carry these viruses all the time.
Also great for St. Patrick's Day.
Oh.
Wow.
They just had the Blarney blowout over the weekend. Bad news for Amherst.
Oh my gosh.
And I bet a lot of herpes were exchanged as well.
Why stop?
So these are not infected, but they are a different type of cells. So you'll see how it looks very different than the ones that we just looked at. These are kidney cells.
Of a human?
Yes.
Oh wow. Oh wow, that's super different.
Yeah. So these are really, really packed together, very bright on the outside, so you can really see the difference between the cells.
Whoa.
And
Yeah.
these kidney cells are infected with herpes too?
No, these ones are not. These are our controls.
Ah.
There's none of that space.
Oh yeah, so these are a lot more compacted, they're a lot more connected. Looks more like stained glass than the other ones before that looked like the floaters in my eyes.
But like it shows you how much like the virus distorts the cells and the cell walls.
Yeah.
All cells are very different, so that's how we recognize them as well, by their shape.
I've never been so excited to get herpes.
This is the no food. See? No food.
This is a no food refrigerator. What goes in there?
Like this, like a whole bunch of reagents that we need to grow these cells, to manipulate those viruses, so they all confine into those spaces, and obviously we cannot mix food with any of this.
What is transfection?
So you saw the cells under the microscopes, and so sometimes what we want to do is force something into these cells, and so that's called transfection.
If you want to keep your grants, you better change its name. We learned about those transgenic mice leaving the herpes lab. Well, Dr. Mandy Muller, as we wrap up this look at the 5 years of the pandemic, what do you think people should know about SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, here and now in 2025?
Well, this virus is very much still circulating. I just checked last night, and there are still a couple hundred people dying from coronavirus infection every week in the U.S. So you still want to be very careful. You still, if you can, you should get your vaccines, your boosters every year. If you have any symptoms, ideally you would want to test, although I know this is getting expensive. So at least, my advice would be to continue wearing masks if you have any respiratory symptoms. Could be coronaviruses, it could be something else, but no matter what, you don't want to spread those. So let's continue to work together as a community to try and help people that can't actually get vaccines and people that are very susceptible to these viruses. I think that's the most important thing.
Are the mirrors on your wall set up in the pattern of a particular virus?
The pattern, no, but the shape, yes. Lots of viruses have this icosahedral structure, that's what it's called, and so this is this hexagon pattern. I have it all over my house for like every mirror, every possible decoration. Yeah, I used to have a lot more in this office, but obviously I'm clearing out.
You get to take them to your new office.
We'll be sorry to lose you here at UMass Amherst, Dr. Mandy Muller, but tell us a little bit about where and what you'll be doing as you leave here just in the nick of time to go do research.
That's the quiet part, loud part.
In Switzerland, of all places, where things love to remain neutral.
That's right. Yeah, so I'm moving to Switzerland. I'm going to the Institute of Microbiology in Lausanne. I'll be right on the lake. I'll be eating a lot of cheese. I'm very excited about this. But most importantly, I'm going to continue my research on a particular type of herpes called KSHV, continuing to figure out how this virus works, because this is one of the herpes viruses that's associated with cancer development. So the hope is that if we can understand how the virus works, then we can stop it in its track. And so this is our hope for the future.
You were saying to me earlier that the mono kissing disease herpes, that's one of the ones that could eventually cause cancer. So kids, careful who you kiss.
That's right, but these are hard to avoid. So, this is just, again, continue to get monitored. Problems come from people that have other problems. So typically, immunocompromised patients are at risk for these cancers. So, just continue to get checked up. That's the most important part.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks once again to Dr. Mandy Muller.
Indeed. Her lab is so cool.
Yes. Speaking of careful with who you kiss, one of my memories from 5 years ago.
Oh, where is this going?
Has to do with my oldest son, who had, at 15, his first boyfriend.
Oh, yeah, I remember this.
They made it official on March 13th, 2020. boyfriend came over on March 15th, 2020, and I basically said, you are probably not going to see this kid ever again, as he was an exchange student from Spain. And while there were, in that summer, a couple of outdoor opportunities, that was about it. And I was like, you should write a book called Love in the Time of Corona. And then some Netflix or somebody did a TV show based on it. Stole my great idea.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
No, but like when we were leaving the lab, we were reminiscing on like basically the last free day that we had before lockdown was implemented because we were in the same spot.
Right.
Like there was a show that was happening at the Shea Theater. This sort of ballet, like neo-opera thing.
Yes, it was. They bill it as a 90-minute multimedia science fiction production that combines the music of Arc Iris's upcoming futuristic concept album with videography and contemporary dance theater.
Yes. I do not remember what it was called.
It was called I Tomorrow, ITMRW.
Oh, yes. All about like utopias and how they kind of don't sit well with us particularly.
Yeah.
And I went knowing it was like the last time I was going to get a chance to see something for a while.
Yeah.
And it was really neat. There wasn't nearly as much audience interaction as they had clearly built into the show.
Oh, and the number of people that bought tickets versus the number of people that decided to show up on that last day of normalcy, semi-normalcy, was much fewer than
Oh, yeah.
we
I
were
think there were
expecting.
maybe 20 of us.
Yeah.
But it was really cool.
Yeah.
Even being there basically alone.
Right.
And I was very happy that I got to go out and see something.
If you have a fun reminiscence about the 5 years ago pandemic, I know there's a lot of sadness, as I mentioned in that too. A lot of people got sick. A lot of people did die. And again, I don't think we have properly grieved this as a society. Nevertheless, some good and interesting and fun things came out of it too. You became a part of my morning show on the river because of it.
Yes.
That show, this show would not exist if that didn't happen probably. So we'd love to hear your 5-year reminiscence of something positive that has come out of the pandemic for you, perhaps. TheFab413 at nepm.org.
Even if it's as simple as being able to watch the entirety of what was available for Letterkenny like I did in the first 3 days.
Yeah. And Tiger King? I like binge watched
Oh,
that
man,
thing in
I
like 1
forgot
second, but I haven't thought about
entirely
it probably in 5 years.
I know, right? Jeez.
This is the band Arc Iris from that multimedia project that we got to experience on that March 13th, 2020.
Yeah, because the album still came out and it's still really interesting. You can imagine your own dances, if you will. On the next Fabulous 413, although we're in the midst of a housing crisis, the Bay State is making changes. So we'll hear from Secretary of Housing, Ed Augustus, about how Healy's comprehensive housing plan affects Western Mass and beyond.
And we'll gather our flowers and herbs while we may with Susan Pincus of Sawmill Herb Farm and hear how changing focus to perennials and moving to Montague has allowed even more community to grow.
And maybe talk a little bit about how your kids actually do stuff there.
Oh,
or
I'm
have
sure
done
they
things.
do. I can't keep an eye on them all the time. Sometimes they're with their exchange student boyfriend.
Plus a plethora of linguistic discoveries with word nerd Emily Brewster. I'm Khalees Smith.
I'm Monty Belmonte.
See you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.